In today's video, we have the last episode of this pros and cons series that I started on my channel, and I will go over pros and cons of every single CRYO character in Genshin Impact, and you can check out the other 6 videos for GEO, Hydro, Dendro, Anemo, Electro, and Pyro that I've already uploaded, so consider subscribing so you don't miss out on more Genshin Impact content, and soon Honkai Star Rail. And a special thanks to everyone who is supporting me, and I really appreciate every single one of you. Without wasting your time, let's start the video, starting off with one of the best CRYO units in the game, Ayaka. As for her pros, she has a simple yet useful kit, has a really strong elemental burst, and her energy regeneration capabilities are good enough to get her burst back, but keep in mind you need some energy recharge stats in her artifacts, and you don't need a lot of on-field time with this character, and you can easily use elemental skill plus burst and swap to a different character. Her best in slot 4-star is a craftable weapon called Amenoma Kageuchi, which means every free-to-play player can afford to craft it. And she has synergy with a lot of different characters in the game, and her alternative sprint used to be bad, but after Hoyoverse fixed it, it's pretty fun to use, especially for running on water in open world. For her cons, if your elemental burst misses the target, which can happen sometimes, you lose on a lot of DPS since her burst is her most important part of her kit. You also need to keep an eye out on your stamina for consistency, and her elemental burst cost makes her need a lot of energy recharge for artifact substat, but it's not that big of a deal because she can generate a good amount of particles. Overall, a great DPS, and even at C0 she can do some serious damage and isn't really constellation reliant to be useful. Next character, Chongyun. And for his pros, he has a unique method of applying CRYO in his kit, and his burst cost is low, meaning he can easily get it back and can increase normal attack speed and infuse CRYO to all melee characters' weapons within his elemental skill range. For cons, his elemental skill can be harmful for your overall damage, as it will stop some reactions for melee characters that don't need the CRYO infusion in some situations, and his damage isn't anything exceptional, and he's fairly constellation reliant to perform well, either with his cooldown ability in C2 and his overall damage improvement with C6. Next character, Diona. For her pros, she can be a decent shielder with proper build and also can heal your team quite effectively, and since she scales with HP, she's easy to build with low investment, and in some teams can be a good CRYO battery. As for her cons, her CRYO application is slow and the shield can be inconsistent sometimes and needs more constellations to shine, and her personal damage is really low and not reliable at all, but she's meant to be a support unit based on her kit, so it's not that big of a deal. And Sacrificial Bow is necessary since her burst cost is 80, but with the right build, she can be a useful support, especially early on in the game. Next character is Eula, my second favorite CRYO character after Ayaka, and for her pros, she can deal a really good consistent physical DPS, although it's not the most popular type of way to deal damage in this game, and she has a burst that can deal damage that will probably be record breaking for your account and great for damage per screenshot enjoyers, and she has CRYO and physical resistance shred in her kit to solidify her damage without any buffs from other characters, and her elemental burst with the right timing can cover a good AoE damage and doesn't really require Bennett or Xingqiu, so you can have those two in a different team for Spiral Abyss and works well in most teams. For cons, you will suffer a huge damage loss if your elemental burst misses the target or doesn't crit. She has a high burst cost and a long cooldown on elemental skill if you hold the skill, which is going to be the most useful way of using it. She also needs a shielder, because in her kit there isn't any interruption resistance during her normal attacks, but overall I would say Eula is a fantastic physical DPS character. If you like that type of gameplay and the design of this character, I would highly suggest building her and pulling on her banner whenever she is available. Next one is the newest CRYO character that is similar to Eula in some aspects, Freminet. And for his pros, he can be decent at shatter team comps, which is not the most desirable reaction, but he is good at it, and useful passive talent for Fontaine underwater exploration, which reduces the stamina consumption. And he can deal CRYO and physical damage simultaneously, which can be achieved by 2-piece Pale Flame and 2-piece Blizzard Strayer artifact sets. And for cons, scaling on his skill multipliers are low and susceptible to interruptions, the slow movement of his, which is the case for almost any Claymore user, not the best unit at either CRYO or physical, so he can easily get replaced by a few different characters. Next up, Ganyu. As for her pros, has a few good free-to-play options, and has a simple and easily understandable kit. Can be used with different playstyles of either using her burst and skill in a quick swap way, or have her be the main DPS with her strong charge shot attacks, consistent with her damage and has a good multiplier on stats, and with her crit rate scaling makes it even easier, and her charge shots increases crit rate of subsequent charge shot attacks, making her a really good DPS or sub DPS unit overall. And for cons, she has low HP and low defense based stats, means that she is easily vulnerable and requires a shielder like Zhongli to use her charge shots, otherwise you might get interrupted and killed quite easily, and you might need constellations for her charge shots to be more useful because at C0 each of them takes 2 seconds. But if you want a valuable DPS or sub DPS that you can rely on, she may be the right choice for you. Next character, Kaeya. For his pros, he can be a good cryo battery, his talent have high multipliers that can vastly improve his overall damage, has a fast reliable off-field cryo application from his burst, which has a long duration time, and we've all used his skill to make ice bridges on water since he has low cooldown and really easy to use, and he can be used in both physical or cryo builds. And for his cons, his elemental skill has a really low range, and also his burst requires to get really close to opponents for them to hit the target, and freeze teams have better battery options that brings more utility, and constellations of this character are important, yet you can't really obtain them since he's never on event banners with rate ups and only obtainable randomly from standard banner, meaning you may potentially never get another copy of Kaeya. Next one is Layla. She has an amazing uptime on her burst and provides the shield on a low 12-second cooldown, which is the same as the duration of the shield, meaning you can have 100% uptime with the right management, and generates a decent amount of cryo particles even off field. All of her abilities scale off of HP, which means she can be easily built. And for cons, she has fairly weak personal damage and does not provide much for the team other than the shield and cryo infliction, which is single target at that, and support abilities of her are locked behind constellations, especially Constellation 4, meaning she is a constellation reliant character, which is always a downside. Next character, Mika. For his pros, he has a good elemental particle generation and can buff physical DPS characters, which is rare in this game, and provides party-wide healing with burst and continuous single target healing for the unit on the field. And for cons, long elemental skill cooldown without much value, and even his source of cryo infliction is limited to his skill, and he has really low personal damage, and most of his buffing capabilities are locked behind constellations, and you need high energy recharge to maintain his burst, and not a really good character to use unless you need a support for physical DPS characters, but I wouldn't advise going for this character. Next character is the one that makes you depressed after using all of your hard-earned primogens for your favorite character, then you get confronted by none other than qiqi. And for her pros, she can be a good healer and good for physical teams and superconduct team comps, but that's just it. And for cons, her skill has a long cooldown and energy regeneration and cryo application is nothing impressive, and she doesn't regenerate elemental particles until Constellation 1. Overall, not a great unit unless you absolutely need a healer and you like the character for whatever reason, but I'm not here to judge. Let's get on to the next character. Next up, Rosaria. For her pros, she works well with other cryo units. Short skill cooldown allows her to generate a good amount of particles and can consistently apply cryo off field, and can buff the crit of her team with her burst, but doesn't apply to herself, and can be a good cryo applicator in some cases. And for cons, her second constellation is significant to her performance on your team, and her C6 is the only way to have her for true support for physical damage, and her elemental skill is useless against big enemies and bosses. Next character on the list, Shenhe. For her pros, she's easy to build with low investment, and she can boost elemental skill, burst, normal, charged, and plunging attacks for the whole team, and provides cryo damage bonus on top of that. And she can overall be a great cryo applicator with the ability to shred cryo and physical resistance in enemies as well, and her elemental burst can cover a wide area, which is always nice. But for cons, energy management is required for her consistency, and there are limited team comps where she can shine in, which will be physical and cryo focused teams, which in conclusion means her non-physical and cryo party members can't fully take advantage of her buff. But I would say if you use a lot of cryo units, she's a fantastic support for them, and you will see a huge difference in your damage with her presence on your team. And at last, I know Aloy is technically another cryo character, but you can't obtain her anymore and she doesn't have constellations, and I don't think that unit is even worth talking about, so she doesn't provide anything special into the game, so I decided not to include her. And with that, this was the last episode of briefly talking about pros and cons of characters from each element. Don't forget to watch the other 6 videos for each element that I've already uploaded, and consider subscribing for more videos like this and much more that I've already planned in the upcoming days. And with all that being said, have a good day or night, and peace.